all the demons quiet. Yeah, we were built to thrive, yeah. I think that we've all had enough. What keeps you up at night, yeah. Make all the demons quiet, yeah. We were built to thrive, yeah. I think that we've all had enough. Yeah, I think that we've all had enough. Sick of dealing with the old plan. They know that we're calling it bluff. You got me like, oh yeah, I think that we've all had enough. Sick of dealing with the old plan. They know that we're calling it bluff. Hey, it's too late to try to go contain it. A generation fueled by creation. We live lives on a small screen nation. We control the airwaves, no negotiation. I refuse to think we need saving. Something good will come from creation. And when we think that the world is too anxious, we'll adapt, evolve, survive, and save it. What keeps you up at night, yeah. Make all the demons quiet, yeah. We were built to thrive, yeah. I think that we've all had enough. What keeps you up at night, yeah. Make all the demons quiet, yeah. We were built to thrive, yeah. I think that we've all had enough. Yeah, I think that we've all had enough. Sick of dealing with the old plan. They know that we're calling it bluff. You got me like, oh yeah, I think that we've all had enough. Sick of dealing with the old plan. They know that we're calling it bluff. Hey, oh yeah, I think that we've all had enough. Sick of dealing with the old plan. They know that we're calling it bluff. You got me like, oh yeah, I think that we've all had enough. Sick of dealing with the old plan. They know that we're calling it bluff.
Birds flying high, you know how I feel. Sun in the sky, you know how I feel. Breeze drifting on by, you know how I feel. It's a new dawn, it's a new day, it's a new life for me.
Turn on your mind now, tune into the feed. We're planting digital flowers from a single tiny seed. Yeah, power to the collective in the data and the soul. The hive mind's getting louder, finding voice and control.
What is going on, Hive? Let me check my audio quick. Oh, yeah, we are all Gucci. Welcome to the Hive Mind. If this is your first time tuning in, this is a contrarian thinking live stream where we are not afraid to think past the headlines. So if you're easily rattled or offended on behalf of others, this probably will not be the stream for you. However, if you are the quote conspiracy friend in your friend group, you have found your people and you are amongst others that like to look into the footnotes and think contrarily about things and realize that we might be being lied to by the mainstream media. Now, today we have a very special guest coming into the Hive, a gentleman known as John Ray, who has been working on the Long Island serial killer. I also have Devil's Advocates backstage, who I will bring up shortly, and I will let him dive into the awesome interview that he was able to get done with John. And I want to quickly go ahead and say what's up to everybody, and I will then bring up DA. What's going on, UK Karen? Gabby Girl says, yay, we love Devil's Advocate. That we do. Dina, good to see you. Artie, nice. Thank you for tuning in from Wales. What's up, K Wolf? What's going on, 1111? Shout out to the Mitty Witty. Brisbane, Australia in the house. How are you doing, Chelsea? Crime Spy says, what up to Devil's Advocates? Mommy Karen, how are you doing? What is going on? Ania's mom. Hopefully I said that right. Sometimes it's hard when all the letters are put together. What's going on, 1-1? And Karen and Terry. Scout, what up? The other Carrie's tuning in from Ohio. Hannah says the Twin Peaks Rizzler. I love that nickname for him. What's up, Marissa Ayo? Amanda B from West Virginia. What's up, Grammy T? Roma Makuka tuning in from Chicago. Shout out to Discord Dawn. And Haley Muckinfuss, thank you for being here as well. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to bring up DA, and we are going to get into it. And I'll let him give a little bit of a background on what we could look forward to with his interview. DA, what's going on, man? How you doing?
Hey, what's going on? Yeah, what you can look forward to is panic, sheer panic on my part right now. Like,
oh, no.
This has been a nutbaggish thing, because when we set this up weeks ago and I recorded this interview that we're about to watch with John Ray, we scheduled this date for premiering it for various reasons. And then CrimeCon happened and I was in CrimeCon, and then I'm driving back from CrimeCon and I was like, I'm literally driving back in town as we're about to go live with John Ray's premiere. And I hadn't talked to him during the entire time of CrimeCon. Then I'm sending him emails and I wasn't getting a response. And then I got response and they're like, hey, wait a minute. You seem to have the wrong time. We have the wrong time. We're clusterfucking. John Ray's in Manhattan doing a trial. And he's like, he's going to try to make it back for your time, but can you confirm the time? And I'm like, shit, I don't know. And then I send him a link and I'm like, shit, did I send him the right link or did I send him Birdie's link? I'm a little fucking terrified at the moment. I could have fucked this up 6 ways from Sunday.
Well, hopefully the prep work was done correctly. You seem like you're super detailed just from whenever I've worked with you, and so I can maybe go ahead and lay it out to the Hive how this is going to work. So Devil's Advocates has the interview loaded. Him and I are going to be up in the upper right corner, like when we do a full screen live and I'm sharing a video. So we will be up there reacting. We're also going to be much more like in the chat. That interview is just over an hour, and then that is when John Ray will be joining us in the Hive to do a live Q&A. So depending on how much you know about LISC, or formerly known as Gilgo Beach, I would say, tune into this interview, and you're probably going to learn a lot. And from the sounds of it, DA, correct me if I'm wrong, but you had said there was, 2, 3, 4 things that he had said that you've never heard before, and you follow this case relatively closely.
Yeah, it's ironic. There was some moments in there, my jaw literally dropped, and I was like, holy shit, when have I ever heard that before? And it was kind of funny because John said after the interview, boy, I wish I would have, told you some new stuff. There's stuff that people haven't heard. And I'm like, you already did say shit I'd never heard. So there may be more if I don't screw this up 6 ways from Sunday, because John was like, man, there's so much more I could have said. And I was like, dude, I couldn't be happier. Like, I heard shit I have never heard. And other people who have been following the case also said, wow, I didn't know that piece. So there's some really, really great moments in here. I'm really excited to show people about it. I think maybe I should do a little bit of a primer about John Ray and the case for those who may not know the case. And again, reiterate that John Ray is going to join us in a perfect world if I gave him the right link. And I did resend the link, even in a panic right now. By the way, if the link I sent you didn't work, try this link. So that'll just confuse him even more. But I wanted to make sure he's got 12 ways to get into the show. What's going to probably happen is Birdie and I are going to play a pre-recorded interview between myself and John Ray. And it's going to get a little confusing because Birdie and I will be in one corner and I will be in another corner in the video a lot of times because I went small with John Ray. So I might be in 2 places on the screen at the same time, if that won't be confusing you enough for. But John Ray is going to join us when he gets back from Manhattan, back to his home area on Long Island. And when he does, he's going to call into the backstage. We'll probably pause the audio and video live right at that moment and say, hey, and because John won't even be able to talk to us. So we need to let John know, hey, John, we see you on backstage. Just hang tight. We're about 17 minutes away from finishing the interview. So he'll get brought up to speed, and we'll pause that interview when he comes on. So in the meantime, go ahead and give us any questions that you might have for John Ray. We'll be watching, Birdie and I, when he comes on. If you follow this case, this is your opportunity to have John Ray on. Let me tell you a little bit about John Ray. And go ahead, Birdie. Do you have something you want to say first?
I was going to say something just about, just in general about the case and ask you, but go ahead.
Yeah, so I was just going to tell you a little bit about John Ray and how he got involved in this case. So in 2010, there was an individual, Shannon Gilbert, who called 911 and said that somebody was trying to kill her, and she went missing on Long Island. She was a sex worker, and she had come out to Long Island, and something went wrong, and she called in to 911 saying that someone's trying to kill her. She went missing, and they couldn't find her. And for the large part, law enforcement blew it off as she's just a prostitute. She'll resurface somewhere later on. It's no big deal. There was really nothing on that 911 call that was strange. John Ray's family didn't believe it. The Shannon Gilbert's mother, Mary, had put in a mission to find who killed her daughter. She knew she was dead. They were trying to find her. In the process of months, because it was winter and things froze over, they stopped looking for Shannon Gilbert. They resumed the search for Shannon Gilbert, and they started to find bodies along Long Island, and it became known as the Gilgo 4. There was 4 bodies, and every single time, by the way, they found those bodies, Mary was brought to question on whether or not it was her daughter. Those were not her daughter. They continued to look for Shannon Gilbert, and this became the start of realizing that there was a serial killer on Long Island. And then the question became is whether Shannon Gilbert was one of those victims of the serial killer. Now, in 2022, Rex Heuermann was identified as a Long Island serial killer. Shannon Gilbert's role in this may not be one of his kills, maybe one of his kills may be related to it. You'll have to watch the interview to hear some of those pieces. But John Ray took on that family's case to try to find the answers of Shannon Gilbert's disappearance. During the whole course of the investigation, John Ray in particular stumbled upon a massive amount of police corruption in Suffolk County. The chief of police was sent to jail during the whole investigation. He tried to dismantle the investigation into the Long Island serial killer. Crazy shit in this case. And I'm going to ask him about some of those moments. Why were the police trying to halt or get in the way of an investigation of the Long Island serial killer? Why did they lie about Shannon Gilbert and tell the mother that things about that case that weren't true? What's going on in Suffolk County? So John's going to give you as much of those answers as he can in this interview. He's done public appearances before, and he's got, by the way, just a teaser, some crazy theories that really brought my attention. For example, John Ray believes that the family, Rex Heuermann's wife, Asa, and his daughter, Victoria, may know damn well that their husband and father were killing women in the basement of their house. The official story is they had no clue and they have no idea that's going on. John Ray says, I've got reasons to believe that the family did know what was going on in that house. So we talk a little bit about that as well. John Ray is a fascinating guy, 42 years plus in law. I can't even begin to tell you all the things about John Ray. He's going to give you a little bit of his introduction at the beginning of this interview on his history. I'll let him do that for himself. I think for the most part, we're ready to go, Bertie, if you want to fire it up. But
yeah, absolutely. And so I would say, Hive, let's also just address, a very obvious situation going on. I would say, let's all use this hour to sit back, relax, learn about the Long Island serial killer, in addition to just, we're talking about the Idaho 4 a lot. I'm very excited to see what Devil's Advocates and John have in this interview. And so thank you all to everybody that is tuning in. And DA, I'm going to go ahead, get this up on screen, get us up in the corners.
One sec. I do want to say, guys, Bertie was part of the plan of this interview from the very beginning. I wanted to do this interview with Bertie. Some things got in the way of that happening. So just in case you're wondering why Bertie's doing this, and I think there's a really good chance, Bertie, that you and I are going to interview John Ray together in the future. So it didn't quite happen. So now we're doing it this way as a premiere together. But I think you and I are going to get a crack with John Ray coming up in the future. So I'm pretty excited about it.
Yeah, that'll be awesome, man. And I'm stoked to have him here in the Hive for the Q&A. So like I said, everybody sit back, relax. DA and I are going to be up in the corner. We're going to have our cameras on, but we will be in the chat. You'll probably see some reactions that I'll have, because I have only seen small clips of this, as DA only had shown this to his members only. So we are premiering this to the Hive and to probably first-time viewers for the first time, right?
Yeah. Only members only have seen pieces of this. So most people have not seen it.
All right. Well, here we go. Got audio, DA?
Yeah, I do.
All right.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, this is a really, really big deal. We've got John Ray, the attorney who started out representing Shannon Gilbert's family in the Long Island serial killer case, Gilgo Beach. If you have watched any documentary whatsoever, whether it's Gone Girls on Netflix or The Killing Season on A&E or Prime, you already know John Ray. You've seen John Ray's face. He's all over this. He is larger than life. I have been excited to get a chance to talk to you, John. I'm looking forward to picking your brain a little bit and having you educate our audience about the differences between prosecutors and defenders and, you know, victims advocates and stuff like that. So first of all, John, I want to say thank you so much. I couldn't even cover your whole career, which has spanned a lot, right? I can't cover it and do it justice. So I'll try to do that in an intro, but go ahead and maybe, you know, tell us a little bit about yourself and your career, and then we'll get started with some good questions.
I'm a small practitioner that has many cases and have had many cases on a national scope or international scope for many years. My very first case when I opened my practice the day I came out of law school, I got admitted to the bar finally. When it usually takes 9 months for that to happen. When I opened my practice very first day, I had a significant public case where I had sued the Ayatollah Khomeini from Iran back after he had taken over in the Iranian Revolution in 1979, and I sued him in 1983, I believe it was. Yeah, and I sued the Mustazafan Foundation, which owned the building in Rockefeller Plaza in New York City. And and I sued them for discrimination against Jewish women who worked at the Mustazafan Foundation, and on behalf of one of the leading members of the government, the Iranian government, Noshivaran Hatami, who was discriminated against when they fired him from his very significant jobs he had there. So I took on a case right away. And parallel to that case, I also I started with a case involving Dick Schaap, who was a famous sports announcer. And I represented his wife in a battle with the landlord in her penthouse in New York City. And so Liz Smith, the famous columnist, covered that case. And that's how I began. And ever since then, I've had those kind of cases coming in one after the other over the course of 40. Now I'm in my 43rd year. So I didn't pick these on purpose. They came to me. Hatemi came to me in the dead of night, and Madeline Schaap found me out from a person that I represented right when I started, and she called me up, and there I was. So
it's funny because you're larger than life. I tell you, like, and for you to start out with big cases, and it seems like all you do is just get into the center of big things. It's pretty impressive. And I watch you, I go, that guy's got balls of steel. Like, I literally, you say some stuff, and I'm just like, how does that guy get the nerve? But I guess you started out trial by fire and just kept going with it. So
I did, and I knew nothing about the law. I didn't even know when I went into the landlord-tenant court. I had no idea what the word application even meant, and I just threw myself in and learned from the bottom up. That's what I did.
That's great. So, you know, it's funny. I've been lucky enough since I started YouTube, and I haven't been doing true crime too long, but I've kind of befriended a couple of attorneys, and a couple of the attorneys that have come on my show, they're defense attorneys, criminal defense attorneys. And you spent some time, obviously considerable time in criminal defense, but I wanted you to kind of like help, because I think for me, it was important when I'm talking legal documents and and I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know anything. I talk a little over my head, but when I'm breaking down legal documents, and sometimes I have attorneys on, we're always looking from the prosecution and what their strategy is, and the defense and what their strategy is. Can you explain to us how your role is as a victim's advocate? Is that the right way to kind of refer to you in this case, around Gilgo Beach, is kind of the victim's advocate's role, and how does that differ from prosecutors and defenders in this case?
Yeah, I think that's a fair characterization. It differs only in that our stake in the game, my stake in particular in the game, and it's more than a game, by the way.
Sure,
that's just an expression, but is discrete from both sides. You know, the prosecution is limited to the evidence garnered for him or her by the police department. He's, they can do their own investigation. They even have a unit to do that, but it's not on the scope that the police would have. So they have their limits, and their job is to simply prove a case beyond a reasonable doubt. So they have all kinds of legal restrictions and legal limitations that they operate under by definition. And
Sure.
likewise for the defense, their job is to basically win and get the guy off. And in doing that, they too have there's limits. They're limited to the case. As soon as they go outside the scope, nobody wants to hear it. Whereas in my situation, I'm free in looking out for the victims that I'm representing and their families. I'm free pretty much to investigate, to bring a lawsuit if I wish, to do almost anything, and to accept all kinds of evidence that the police will often reject. So I have a broader scope. I have a value that's fairly unique in these cases, and that's the value I try to use.
And my mind's all over the place because I got a million questions for you. One of which, for example, is, you kind of talked about like the prosecution's job, right? Once they've decided who they're going after, their job is to make the best case they can for why that's the guy. Conversely, the defense's job is to focus in on the one guy that's at being charged and prove that he didn't do it, or reasonable doubt, whatever. And sometimes I've been a little overcritical in saying, look, prosecutors and defenders at the end of the day don't give a shit what really happened, pardon my French, because their job is to get a conviction if they're a prosecutor, or to get an acquittal or something if they're the defense. And it's not really a matter of what the truth was. It's a matter of make your best argument and go. So do you feel like that's unfair? I mean, do you feel at the end of the day that both sides are looking for justice, or do they become narrow focused and say, my job is to convict Rex Heuermann, my job is to get him off, and that's kind of where they get blinders? What would you say?
I would say that it's nobody's job to seek justice. I think it's a great mistake that we make historically to say that we're seeking justice. The prosecutor is seeking to win. The defense is seeking to win. The court is seeking to find out from both of them what is the legal truth, which isn't necessarily the truth. And
Right.
likewise for the so-called finders of fact, the jury. Do you ask a court reporter, who's an essential part of the case, don't take this down because that person's speaking falsely, or that person is a bad person, or again, because that person doesn't really seek justice? No, you don't. She plays her role, or he. And likewise for each of the people I mentioned. Justice, if on earth it comes at all, and it's very imperfect on earth, isn't it? If it comes at all, comes because of the interaction of all these people, not because one of them decides to carry the banner of justice. I'm afraid of people who carry the banner of justice. They can be dangerous. We've heard many stories in history, haven't we, of people who claim to be representing justice.
Right.
None of us
Right.
are. We've designed this system so that justice emerges, hopefully on earth, earthly justice emerges, not because any one person owns it. That's my point.
Gotcha. Yeah. I mean, I get that. And it just, I get a lot of times, you and I had a brief conversation before jumping on the call before about how sometimes, like law enforcement, for example, can get narrow focused. And I just wonder sometimes with that narrow focus, they start to like make mistakes because their job becomes so focused on getting the guy that they decided to go after. And so that was kind of where I was going with that. But I do ask, as your role as a, kind of like this peripheral role as a victim advocate, and you're saying you can do some things that the prosecution can't do and the defense can't do. Do they look at you as a nuisance or a help? Do you have any interaction, for example, with the prosecutor? If you're seeking tips on who might have killed Shannon or any of the victims, if you're seeking tips and something comes through and it has exculpatory evidence, for example, in the case, do they not want to hear from you? Do they view you as a nuisance, or do you interact with them and say, hey, I've got something that says there's no way he could have been the one that did this particular crime? Like, how do they feel about you on those sides?
Well, most of the time, whenever I'm in such a role as that, the prosecutors are not open. They're fairly closed to suggestions, to evidence, and the like. Just experienced things that way. And the defense, there's a lot of ego, and you know, so you sometimes, if, you know, when you're in my seat, you're stepping on egos, and so they're not too happy to hear from me either. Although in the case of Rex Heuermann, Michael Brown, who's the attorney for Heuermann, he's a good friend of mine and a former prosecutor. He tried his first jury trial against me many years ago, and we've stayed friends. So, you know, if I interact with him at all, it would be on a professional level. You know, I would find no impediment. But as a general rule, yeah, I'm not a welcome entry into the cause. That's for sure.
And that's good to know, because I was always thinking, well, you know, if you get some kind of tip, are they like, oh, what do you have for us, Ray? Or are they like, man, this guy's just a nuisance on the outside that makes our life more difficult on prosecuting this case, you know? So I'm glad you kind of, it sounds like you're more on the nuisance side for them than they're looking for Ray to give them some good information, John Ray to give them some good information. Sorry.
That's true. And
yeah,
I mean, and you're leaving out one body of people who are very important in a criminal case, and that is the police department, the law enforcement agencies, the FBI, and so on. And they're extremely defensive of their techniques and their work. And so if I come along and I'm critical of what's happened in the case, I become anathema to many of them, not all, but to many of them, and to the hierarchy especially. And
well, I think that's what appealed about you, right? That's what appealed to me about you, is you are critical of law enforcement and you hold them to the fire. And I feel that's where I'm at. That's my wheelhouse as well. Like, I don't have a beef against law enforcement. Good cops are fantastic, but there are bad cops out there as well. And so I like to make sure that we question things. And I think you're a real questioner. Like, you're not afraid to ask the really difficult questions. And you've been critical about law enforcement's role in this and the things that happened. And I want to get into that a little bit more as we go, to ask about your feelings about law enforcement. One thing I wanted to ask before we kind of finish up a little bit of this part of it was your role, for example, representing the families isn't directly tied to Rex, right? Like, your role is to find answers to what happened to the victims, and whether that's Rex or not Rex, at the end of the day, isn't what the family wants. They want to know what actually happened, right? They don't have a stake in whether or not Rex goes down unless they are convinced that Rex is the killer.
Well, I believe by now most people are convinced that Rex Heuermann is the killer. So it makes the question moot in a way. But on the other hand, that's just one case, or one person. I mean, not to put too noble a point upon it, but you know, really what I'm interested in, and my clients, to the, you know, whatever degree they wish to be, we're interested in finding the truth. That's not the same thing as finding justice.
Right.
All right. The truth is just the truth, stands alone, stands by itself.
That's
and
interesting.
You know, what is truth? Well, that was a question asked by a pretty famous procurator, wasn't it, in a famous trial? I think he asked Jesus that question.
Right. Yeah.
And so what is truth is still the question, the ageless question, in all endeavors, but especially in the issues of law and the enforcement of law. What is the truth? Now, what happens, I think what you're saying is, it's maybe a broad philosophical discussion at this point, but for what it's worth, right?
Yeah.
What you're saying is that, or suggesting, is that the truth is a very broad subject, but it's the ultimate subject that should involve law enforcement as well as all the other participants in the process. The trouble is that very often the truth gets lost in some of the work performed by those who were involved in the case. And we run into situations where people in the police departments across this country, they get involved in their work, they become committed to a theory, and they cease to pursue the truth, and instead they pursue a goal.
Well said.
You know, convict this guy or that guy, and that's why we have appeals.
Right.
That's why people who were innocent sat in jail and then got out.
Right. And
Precisely
and
because of that.
it's getting ahead of myself, but the reason why I bring it up is because I feel like there's a tendency to close cold cases, to put a bow on things, to make people feel better because they got the boogeyman, and it's not always the truth when they do that. Sometimes the truth is more complex than that. And so what bothers me at the end of the day, I've said this on many cases, is when somebody gets convicted, I want to make sure you got the right guy, because if you get the wrong guy for any one of the murders and somebody who did the murder walks free, then that bothers me on a fundamental level, that somebody's walking free because we didn't want the truth. We wanted a quick and easy answer. And so we just closed a cold case. We got it done. We moved on to the next thing. And I want to make sure that, for example, to put it loosely, in Rex Heuermann's case, I want to make sure all 10 of the ones they charge him with are all his, and that somebody isn't going to get off and get a pass and they're going to stop looking for them because they thought it was Rex's and it wasn't, or something to that effect. I just want to know the truth at the end of the day. Is it really his? Can we rest at the end of the day and say we got the right boogeyman, if that's the case, and we can all feel better, or did we cut some corners and get it wrong?
It's the heart of every issue. It's at the heart of every issue. What is truth?
Right.
Right.
So in Shannon Gilbert's case, there's one thing that really bothered me. So in 2010, I think she went missing, right? In 2011, I think the family and you made an arrangement to acquire you. And whether you want to tell us the details about whether they reached out to you or reached out to them or how that happened doesn't matter. But what I know is it seemed to me that her death was officially ruled an accident, right? She either drowned or she hypothermia or some kind of case like that. And yet, if I read it right, it took nearly 4 years for us to get 911 calls and transcripts for the family to know what happened. And there's 2 questions I have about it. One, why did it take so long? If it's not an open case, so they can't pull the maneuver of, well, this is an ongoing investigation. If they've ruled it an accident or whatever, then it can't be an ongoing investigation. So one, why did it take so long? And maybe I'm wrong, so correct me on that too. How long did it take, and why did it take that long? And then the last question would be, why is it that I read, and maybe I'm wrong, that they basically only allowed you to review that on behalf of the family? Like, it wasn't like something that the public could have requested, like a Freedom of Information Act or a FOIA, kind of request. Why couldn't the public have gotten the same thing you did? Why did they only allow you to look? So clarify for me the timeline on the 911 call, how long it took you to get it, and why you were special in that role and all that.
That's a good question.
The answer is difficult to encompass and encapsulize, because so much occurred in relation to the case of Shannon Gilbert and discreetly the obtaining of the evidence, including the 911 tape. So what really happens is the police department announces before I come into the case, the Suffolk County Police Department officially announces that Shannon very likely drowned. And in fact, they committed to the fact that she did drown, and they hadn't found the body.
What?
Mary Gilbert, who was Shannon's mother, was not convinced that the police were doing their job, and that was so because she had run into roadblock after roadblock on trying to get the police to fully assist her and her family in finding Shannon. And she began to believe, and rightly so, I think, that the police were purposely ignoring her, avoiding her, and not seeking the truth. So that's when she turned to me. I took on her case in just a few days after Shannon's remains were found in the Oak Beach marsh in 2011 in December. And I became her lawyer, and we held a press conference immediately at Oak Beach parking lot. And the purpose of the conference was onefold, and that was to demand that the police step down from a poorly done investigation and ask for the FBI to step in. We were ignored. I wrote to the FBI. I wrote to the U.S. Attorney. We were ignored. The police department, put up a blue wall against anything that I had said. And I thought I fulfilled my role in doing that work, but not true. Several days after I did that, an amazing thing occurred. And this is why my answer to the 911 tape involves this point. I get a letter from an officer of the Detectives Association, the Police Detectives Union. And he writes to me in a 2-page single-spaced letter telling me all the things that I said incorrectly at the press conference. And he did something that I've never seen before done and never since. He revealed during this investigation what he said occurred on the 911 tape. And yeah, and he spelled it out in this letter. And it's shocking because it's an ongoing investigation. You know,
Right.
I can do that. And he wrote me on police union stationery, not on police department stationery, which was also bizarre. And when I got this, but it's bizarre for even to hear from a policeman saying, "Hey, your press conference was wrong. You made this mistake and that mistake." You know, so he went into it and he said, in sum and substance, he said, nobody was upset on the 911 tape. Nobody was upset that night. Nobody was about to be murdered. There was no excitement. Shannon was not excited. Brewer was not excited. There was none of that. And I'm all wet, basically, in claiming otherwise. So he said, so, you know, why are we going into this? This is what happened. She got confused, got lost in the marsh and disappeared. That's it. Well, after I got that letter, I still said did nothing except talk to Mary. I wasn't going to do anything more. But then the police went and published that letter in Newsday, in the letter section with a big black. Newsday took it and published it at their request. I didn't send it to Newsday. They did. Why? When did you ever hear of a police department doing that?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Why? I mean, what you got a theory about why they did it that way?
There's something wrong, something gravely wrong here with the way this investigation has been conducted from the start and until now. There's something gravely wrong. Now,
Yeah.
you know, I don't want to pull rank. Rank is a form of fallacy. You know, I've been around more years than you, therefore I'm right. That's not true. But there is something to be said for experience. And, you know, I've had many investigations I've been involved with. I've had involvement in well over 30 some odd homicides in one form or another in my lifetime. And I do, you know, litigation. I'm, you know, not just a criminal defense attorney. I do an enormous amount of litigation, civil litigation. So I'm involved in investigation a lot. And I've never seen anything like this with the police department doing that.
And Mary didn't believe that it was true, that there was no, you know, that what they were telling was untrue. What made her believe it wasn't true? And what was the reaction when you finally got evidence and proof that she was saying someone's trying to kill her and all these things? Like, you know, they're telling you, hey, there's nothing to see here. And yet Mary was convinced that there was. What convinced her of that? Just a gut feeling, or?
Well, no, there were actual events that occurred that convinced Mary of this. When she first went looking for her daughter, the police officers at the precinct laughed her off and said, "Don't worry, she's a prostitute. She'll turn up."
Good Lord.
And
yeah,
they brushed her off. They just had no interest in talking to her. That was right away. So she experienced that immediately. Then only a day and a half after Shannon disappeared, she gets a call from Dr. Peter Hackett, who is a former police surgeon of Suffolk County and identifies himself and brags about that as such. And Dr. Hackett calls her out of the blue. She lived up in Ellenville, New York, upstate. He's in Suffolk County in Oak Beach. And he tells her, "I'm Dr. Peter Hackett. I run a home for wayward girls. Your daughter applied to be in the home, and I'm seeking your permission. But she came here to my house. I medicated her, and she was with her driver, and she left with her driver and promised to return to enter the home and has not. So I'm concerned." That's what he told her. And none of that was true.
right.
He then called her a second time and told her virtually the same thing. And in that week, that bizarre event occurred. That man identified himself with the Suffolk County Police Department. So of course she was really concerned with that. And we know the story of Hackett. It's another story. It takes you down a big path of other events that of all falsehoods and so forth. Peter Hackett was barely investigated at all by the Suffolk County Police Department, even though he did those things. They brushed him off as a nut. In addition, as she wasn't pushy. You know, contrary to the movie, she wasn't a really aggressive, pushy person. She was delicate and dignified, actually. And she, you know, so she would go along with the police and, you know, can you help me out kind of approach, what's new, that sort of thing. And she wasn't getting the cooperation she expected. So the investigation wasn't moving forward very well, if at all. And so the police department then, knowing that she believed that Peter Hackett was the killer, because there are other things she did. She toured Oak Beach with the family and so on. She believed that Peter Hackett, was responsible for Shannon's death. She asked the police, to stay in close contact with her. Well, they finally did. When they called her and told her, "We found your daughter." That was the first victim who was found in Oak Beach.
Right.
And it was one of the Gilgo 4. Then it turned out it wasn't her daughter.
Right.
So they had to come all the way from Ellenville and go back home. Kind of frustrating. That happened over and over and over and over again. As they found body after body after body, they continued to tell her, "We think we found your daughter." And they didn't. All right. So
I have to ask you, didn't Shannon have like a titanium jaw or something unique that would have made them identify? And why did they jump to the gun and tell a mother that they found her daughter if they could have quickly ruled out that it wasn't her?
I don't know why they did some of the things they did. I have no idea in God's name why they claimed she drowned when they had absolutely no evidence of it whatsoever. Zero. They didn't even know where she was.
Right.
So these things don't make sense unless you start to know some of the other facts, and they start to come together and you say there's something gravely wrong here. All right. Well, what happens is when Shannon finally is located, they had the chutzpah to bring her down from Ellenville in the rain and take her up on the top of a roof of a house to point out in Oak Beach. The house was in Oak Beach on the in the marsh. That's where her body was found, right down there. The chutzpah is not that. The chutzpah was taking her up onto this 20-some-odd foot roof deck and do this because it was Dr. Peter Hackett's home.
Oh my gosh.
And she's already told them she thinks he's the killer.
Oh my gosh.
They used his home to identify the spot where where Shannon is found. It's outrageous. And,
right.
And of course, when that happened, mind you, she's completely paralyzed by all this. All this occurs before I get into the case, but she's now solidly convinced that the police are thwarting this case on purpose.
Let me get this clear. They knew that she suspected Hackett when they took her up on top of his house to look, right?
She herself insisted that Hackett was a suspect.
It's almost like they're, I don't want to go too crazy, but it's almost like they're screwing with her to take her to the guy's house that she suspects and say, "Hey, look, we can see where your daughter's body is from this guy's house." Like, I can't even imagine that.
Yeah. Well, myself. That's what happened. And
crazy.
Yeah. And, to make their investigation of Hackett was so thin, it was ludicrous. They actually took him to Yaphank, to the police headquarters, in a police car. And he immediately invoked his right to a lawyer, which is, if you're not guilty, you don't need a lawyer, for sure. And he lawyered up, as they call it, right away, and he refused to take a lie detector test that he claimed that he had a medical reason not to do it, and so they dropped it after that with Hackett. Nothing more was done with Hackett. So everything, therefore, then came to this. Now she comes and finds me because I had spoken for victims in the Medford murders, the pharmacy murders. The 5 people were shot and killed in the Medford pharmacy. I was the lawyer for the victims there and spoke at the sentencing. So I was hooked up with Mary through a news reporter, and that's when I stepped in to represent her pro bono ever since. But once the police department published that letter in Newsday, and where it says, "Hey, John Ray, you're all wet," and you know, I got my back up and said I've never seen this before, and they're attacking me, and I haven't done anything except ask for a press conference, and I know very little about the case at that point. But I said, I'm not going to stand for this, and I got my Irish up, and you know, you pick on an Irishman, you expect them to fight back, don't you?
So it got personal. It got personal for you.
Indeed,
Yeah.
exactly is what happened. And
Yeah.
so from there, other odd things happened. But when we went to the autopsy meeting with the medical examiner, who's not connected to the police department, allegedly, okay,
Yeah. Yeah.
there were 3 homicide detectives present at the meeting with their arms folded, sitting on folding chairs. And every time I asked a question of any poignancy, the assistant medical examiner, Dr. Sims Childs, would get out of her chair, go over, whisper to the police, come back and answer the question.
Oh my gosh.
That's unheard of in a medical examiner's autopsy meeting. Unheard of. And at that meeting, for the first time, we learned from Dr. Sims Child that there was shouting, there was fighting, the people were upset on the 911 tape. She admitted that to us. So directly contrary to what this letter that had been sent by the police department's representative to the public said, directly contradictory. So you know something's wrong with this picture.
Well, again, though, I mean, did you answer the question though? Why, if they say it's an accident or a drowning, are they stonewalling giving you the 911 call? And I mean, did that happen? Did they delay giving the call? And why, if it's an accident? It's not an ongoing investigation.
Yeah, they did delay. What happened was, I got the authority to ask for those 911 tapes. There are 2 of them. To ask for them once I brought a civil lawsuit during Hurricane Sandy against Peter Hackett on behalf of the estate of Shannon Gilbert and of her mother, Mary. So we commenced that lawsuit in the fall, and in fall was it 2013, I believe. So now I had the authority to gather evidence. And so I used it to say to the police department, may I please have the 911 tapes? They, you know, we foiled them. They fought the foil, and successfully they stopped us from foiling. So I subpoenaed the records. And while the foil case was pending, you know, I had to go through a lawsuit, a whole big lawsuit, you know, full-blown lawsuit over the foil request. The appellate division that covers us, the second department, decided a case dealing with Suffolk County where the medical examiner and the police had refused to give up the same kind of information we were looking for in another case. And the appellate division said, if it's a civil case and it's under subpoena, you have to give up the record. So I went back to court immediately while that case came out, while we were waiting for the foil decision. And we then filed subpoenas, and they denied those, claiming that it was an open, active, ongoing criminal investigation, which it really wasn't at all.
Yeah, I don't understand that.
That it was, and they fought. And I had to fight through several judges ruling on this. And finally, we had a judge who agreed with me and said, yes, give up the tapes. And they appealed that. 2 appeals were filed, and I had to fight. So it took, you know, these things take years to go through all these processes. Wow. And I fought that too, twice, and was successful. So they finally had to give up the tape. Interestingly, I had a detective, former homicide detective from Suffolk County, working with me to help me at that time. And he presented to the police department a version of some of the transcripts that I had taken of the testimony of Dr. Peter Hackett and his family and some neighbors. I did a lot of transcript work, a lot of depositions I'd taken. And we presented to the police this evidence in a binder that I had. So I was trying to get along with them, trying to cooperate with them. And the investigating detective on the case told my investigator John Ray will get those tapes over my dead body.
Wow.
All right. And he also said he'd sell his house if he had to, if the tapes had to be given up, something to that effect, words to that effect.
Wow.
So when he showed up at my office, I believe it was on a Saturday, figuring I wouldn't be there, I guess, but I was. I got there right away. I guess had to walk over his dead body, but he was still alive. So I actually had a cordial conversation with the fellow, and I've actually made friends with him over the course of years. But that's the way it was. So they really didn't want to give up those tapes. And when they finally did, they got a restriction imposed by the court that I could have the tapes and I could use them for my purposes, but I couldn't publicize them. I wasn't allowed to make public. So that rule remained in effect. Although I could talk about things I knew circumstantially, I couldn't talk about exactly the evidence that I had and what it meant. I knew it was on those tapes. But it took until Rodney Harrison became the commissioner of the Suffolk County Police Department. And he, in 2022, came to my office, made people call me and said, hey, let's work together. And came to my office, brought along the head of homicide and a coterie of detectives, and announced to me and to them, and they were actually floored when he announced it. They reacted physically. He said, I'm going to make the tapes public, the 911 tapes public. So basically I had carte blanche to use them.
Yeah.
By the way, that same detective, going back to 2016, I was able to procure the services of Michael Bodden, who was world-renowned, probably the foremost medical examiner in the world. And he lives in Manhattan, and he once was the medical examiner in Suffolk County. And I got Michael to step in to do a new autopsy on the body that I finally acquired. And I'll tell you about that in a second. But Michael was a friend of mine through his brother. His brother Bobby and I played semi-professional football together many years before. So we had a connection, a personal connection, and he stepped in with me pro bono also. And Shannon's remains, her bones, were being held by the medical examiner, and they wouldn't give those up either. We had to fight to get those. I had to go through a lawsuit on that, and I got them and released finally. And we were able to convince a very nice funeral home in Nassau County that had a big morgue area to allow us to do the autopsy there. And we did that. When Michael Bodden concluded that Shannon did not die of natural causes and that her death was consistent with homicide, that was his statement, we held a press conference. Both
via strangulation, right? Wasn't the indication that a bone in the neck had been broken that indicated strangulation, or? Yeah,
the hyoid bone in the neck, which is a U-shaped bone, has horns on the end of it. Actually, two horns. It's a horn here and a horn here, and then on the end of the horns there are horns in turn. Those horns the horns were missing, and the other horns, the main horns, one end of them was roughed up and broken. So, and there was a hole in the middle, drill right, if you will, right center in the middle of almost a circular. When I say drill, I don't mean literally,
right?
But it's a hole right in the center of the bone that went all the way through. And because that bone was broken, Michael concluded that the death was very likely by strangulation and certainly consistent with homicide. So he took into account other circumstances as well. Once we had that press conference, I was called by that chief of homicide. He called me on a Thursday evening, and he said, let's work together. And I said, great. And, I've never had an axe to grind with you guys. I like cops, and I'm highly respectful regarding them. I've cross-examined them many times in other cases, and I've nothing but admiration for the police department as a rule and for particular police officers. So let's work. He's promised to call me, never called me. I called back several times, he never called me. Now he showed up with Rodney Harrison in my office, and I asked him point blank, what, how was it that you concluded that Shannon Gilbert had drowned? And he just shook his head. He shook his head, and he said, "I don't know." And it's stunning, isn't it? I mean,
well, is it what's your? I mean, I don't know if you want to speculate, but is it direction from higher up that said you're going to rule this way, or pressure from higher up to say it's this, or I mean, what is the answer to why they so quickly call it a drowning when they really didn't have reason to say that? Like, I'm just trying to make sense of, like, it looks like they thwarted any investigation into something, try to stop you from getting the tapes, fought it every step of the way. All of this maneuvering that suggests that someone's hiding something. So what other conclusion is there? Somebody's trying to hide something, and what are they trying to hide?
It is not for me to say, because I don't know.
Sure.
I at this stage, I know a lot more than I used to, far more. And there are amazing facts that come out. But it doesn't bring me to a legal conclusion yet.
Well, let me see if I can step outside the bounds and see if, I don't know if you're going to be comfortable with this, but it seemed to me that you brought forward a sex worker who claimed that way back in the day that she had been at a party with the former, chief of police Burke, and that it seemed to me that she indicated that Rex Heuermann might have been at that party as well. That this very large man approached her. Now, I can't remember if this was in the book that I read, Lost Girls from Kolker or whatever, but is there evidence to you, and is it getting too far ahead of us to say, is there some kind of connection with Heuermann and people in the police department? Did they party together? And can you speculate on that or talk about that at all?
I can, sure. But you should first know that this business about drowning, that Shannon Gilbert drowned, announced to the police commissioner. Shannon was found face up with her head on a bush, and they never did a diatome test to determine whether she was drowned. They just abandoned that theory and then said she died of an unfortunate, tragic accident with no evidence of that whatsoever. Zero evidence. Zero. When did you ever hear of a homicide squad making a legal conclusion like that, which was contrary not only to Dr. Biden, but also to the medical examiner of Suffolk County, who said it was undetermined? They said it was an accident when they have no evidence of any accident and never professed any. Yet they were drowning as late as 2022, even though they had also abandoned that same theory. Something is gravely wrong here. That's the point. I'll keep repeating it for emphasis.
Right. Well, and I'm with you, because what I'm thinking to myself is, again, when you've got a suspect who is involved with the police department, whatever, is it that did he just didn't want people looking into that homicide because it was going to open up too many cans of worms of who she was partying with or who she was like? Was it just simply they just wanted people not to ask questions because it would start to open up avenues that they didn't want opened up?
Well, we have the chief of police, corrupt chief of police, Burke, who had a predilection for sex workers and his relationships with them over the course of years. And he was putting the fox in charge of the hen house. He was in charge of investigating the deaths of sex workers. So you can imagine that he didn't want anybody else in the case but himself. And we even have the former police commissioner, the woman, whose name escapes me at the moment, but she announced that it was Burke who had pushed out all the other agencies, the FBI and so on, and told them to step down. And he pushed out the Nassau County Police Department as well. So he stood alone in charge of this investigation from the start. When he came in. He came in only a few days after I held my press conference, and in 2011, and he immediately seems to have shut down that investigation. I said seems to. We need more evidence that the police won't give us, but there has to exist evidence. I mean, even the police commissioner later on said that he suppressed the investigation. He did.
Right, and I
don't forget, This is the same. Look, this is the same police department. There's a pretension that's going on in the public, in the media, the spoon-fed media, spoon-fed by the police department, by the institutions, by the police department themselves, law enforcement, perhaps the DA's office. There's this standard thing that, well, this is all just about a lone killer, and nothing else is involved. Nothing else makes any sense. We'll just leave it alone, and we're only going to focus on the prosecution of Rex Heuermann. And that's just not really fair at all, because it's not really then a search for the truth. There's a greater truth than that Rex Heuermann did this. I digressed a little from your question, but
well, and I'm doing the same, because so it's fair, because as we get into it again, it leads to the question: was there law enforcement way back in the day, like the indications that James Burke or Jimmy Burke used to like to hang out with prostitutes or do drugs even with them? There's some crazy allegations out there that maybe he even liked getting a little rough with the women. Could he have accidentally gone too far at some point and wanted to not have an investigation? He dismantled, it looked like, the FBI task force. He came in and basically dismantled the task force into looking into the Gilgo Beach killer. He seemed like he told the FBI he doesn't want them involved. And that my first thought was, why are you dismantling the task force? What are you trying to cover up? And I've been trying to make heads or tails of that from the very beginning, that it felt like he's got too many connections. And was he trying to hide a friend? Was he trying to hide himself? Was he trying to hide that they knew Rex Heuermann, that there's a past with them? I don't know.
Look, Burke is certainly involved in some way in sex work and sex workers, and alive or dead. He's involved in it. He can't be ignored and denied and left out of the equation like they're trying to do. And remember, this is the same police department today that existed in 2011. There's been no, that was then, this is now. We've got a totally new reformed police department. Tell me how, where, when did that happen? That didn't happen. It's the same police department. Some of them are direct heirs, so to speak, of the Burke regime, and were appointed by Burke in their higher positions. It's the same police department.
Do you think?
That says a lot, because the police department itself is the ones who investigated these cases in the way they have, and have ignored certain evidence. I'll give you an example that is not known to the public very much at all at this time.
Awesome.
Contrary to the police department's claim that Michael Pack, the driver, was innocent of all wrongdoing here, and should not be a suspect, nor should Joe Brewer, the John, and that Shannon was just on a $300 a night trick where she went from Manhattan all the way to Oak Beach with Pack as the driver, and he would get a cut of that money. The absurdity of that theory, it speaks for itself. But contrary to that, I have learned, and I have evidence, that in fact Shannon Gilbert worked for a very large, powerful organization that sold its girls through a group called Lace Party Girls, all across the United States. And their head was a guy named Joseph Ruiz. He worked out of Jersey City. Remember, Shannon was living in Jersey City, and they worked out of a building on Sherman Avenue. And their little gig was that they came up with a clever move. Instead of the traditional situation where the John says, to the girl, "Come and I'll give you cocaine. We'll party together," and he provides the cocaine and he pays for it. They came up with a clever idea. They had the girls deliver the cocaine. The girls brought the cocaine. So the cost of the night was much more expensive. And Shannon Gilbert was, and I spoke to sex workers who actually worked with her in that organization, and I also have documentary evidence. Shannon Gilbert was a $2,500 to $5,000 a night person, and for a single gig. And
wow,
if you represent sex workers like I have, and I represented the sex worker who had the long-term relationship with Burke, Loretta Rickenbacker, by the way, with whom he had a child. And I was her lawyer later on.
Wow. Wow. You've been through some crazy stuff.
Yeah. So having as many sex workers that I've had to deal with and interview and so on, you know, one thing is true. They don't go to trysts without first being paid. No money, a tiny bit of money was found in Shannon's wallet. Brewer claims it was $300 and he claims he never paid it. And she spent over 3 hours. We also know from any sex worker will tell you, when the man ejaculates, the gig is over. That's the end of it.
Right.
Okay. So she spent over 3 hours with Brewer that night, allegedly spent with Brewer. It's not.
Yeah,
like that happened.
Wasn't the story the Brewer found her unattractive relatively early and decided to, you know, I don't want to go down this road and kicked her out? I thought that was the story, that it was kind of over very quickly. She showed up and he's like, yeah, she's not my thing. Go away.
Brewer has told 3 different stories on that. So which one do you like? That came from Brewer, that story.
Right. Right.
But he's not telling the truth.
Sure.
And in fact, as to this organization, you paid them in advance for their girls. You didn't get the girl to take the money, and you paid by credit card. They had a whole system set up, right? And there was a dump place on Horace Harding Boulevard, off of the expressway in Queens. We would go to give the organization, if the girl got anything at all money-wise, she would put it there. She wasn't, the whole thing that happened that night, the source of that night is all screwed up. They don't have it right. It's not the truth as to what happened. Shannon Gilbert, in fact, was busted in a big bust that took place in New Jersey, along with Joseph Ruiz and several other people involved with the Lace Party girls. She was busted a few months before she disappeared, and she was indicted, and she was a cooperating witness in the indictment. When did you ever hear of the police department not searching for a cooperating witness who disappeared?
Right.
Heard of. But that happened. And I have the evidence of that. That happened. And I've spoken to, I've verbally interviewed as well people involved in that. Shannon Gilbert was under indictment at that time, the night she disappeared. Okay.
Wow.
No way she would have gone to a tryst in Oak Beach for $300. She was worth a lot more money than that. She was one of their top earners.
So you're right. And so what you're saying is, you know, this isn't a cheap trick, and this is people with money. These people had some significant money, and we're paying her a lot of money, and it changes the whole, because again, when you get money involved, then you get powerful people, you get people who are connected to it, because power, you know, money knows money, and you start running in the same circles, and so you begin to have to ask who are they.
All right, Hive. It looks like we got John Ray backstage, and so John, we can see you. I believe you could probably hear us through the screen. There is a couple of minutes of the interview left, so we will be bringing you up shortly. DA, do you got anything to say? It looked like you were just on the phone with him.
Yeah, like I said, I had some real technical difficulties. It's my fault. John was waiting for us, and I was like, I bet you he's there already. So I gave a call to his office. He's now connected and backstage, like you said. So, John, you're not going to be able to really talk for the moment. We're almost done with this, and then we'll bring you up. You guys have a great opportunity. John's in the wing now, ready to answer all those questions. We've got so many questions lined up. But let's go ahead and finish the interview. At the very, very end of this interview, I actually tell him to hang on the phone for a minute while I get the upload done. That's part I didn't edit well, but when that happens, we'll shut the stream down and we'll go to get John up here on the screen with us.
Yeah, thanks for being here, John. I'm excited to ask you some questions.
They all know. So,
well, the story doesn't end there. From what I told you, it turns out that the Joe Ruiz's organization was renting space in this building in Sherman Avenue. The owner was a friend of Ruiz, and the owner himself was running a ring of child pornography, where he had over 30,000 images of children, running it national and internationally wide out of the same building at the same time. And a multi-state task force busted this guy. And they busted him, I'm not sure exactly of the date, but they busted him in that building in Sherman Avenue that Shannon was working out of. When they busted the guy, they were led by, it's a multi-state task force. They were led by the Suffolk County Police Department. And the leader of that bust was Dominic Verone, the man who said she drowned. So something's gravely wrong with this whole story. There's something
Yeah.
gravely wrong with what happened to Shannon that night. And there's substantial evidence now that there were more than Pack and Brewer who were present and in or around Shannon Gilbert that night. And when you understand that Shannon Gilbert's alleged confused state of mind doesn't exist at all,
Yeah.
when you understand that that there's an equal likelihood that she didn't spend her night in Joe Brewer's home, that she arrived in Oak Beach, went wherever she went, and found her way to her safe house, which was Brewer's house, when she was in trouble. That's why you hear her whispering when she first calls, almost whispering in a low voice when she first calls the 911 operator. And if you listen to her statements with that perspective in mind, that she came back into that house that night before, when she then immediately made the call, everything else she says starts to make a lot more sense. Even when she says to Pack, "Are you in on this? Are you part of
Yeah.
it?" All right. They are trying to kill me. She said it several times. Not he, they.
Right.
Why
Right.
would she say they if there's only a he? All right. And the whole story of the police department is completely absurd. It's factually absurd that she then wandered off into the marsh. We'll be here another
Yeah.
2 hours for
Right.
me to explain that. But their whole story is absolutely silly, and it's the same police department that's investigating Rex Heuermann. Now, I have
So,
verbal evidence that Rex Heuermann. I have witnesses who have said that Rex Heuermann did party in Oak Beach, and that Rex Heuermann was at a party with policemen in Oak Beach. But you don't know whether that's reliable testimony or not. I have no idea.
is this from decades before or more around the time of Shannon's disappearance?
Before.
Yeah. But still, I mean, it could be evidence of a pattern of behavior.
I don't know if it's valid evidence, but it's
Right,
evidence.
you don't.
As
Yeah.
opposed to no evidence. And I'm
Right.
steadily gathering evidence. As Rodney Harrison, the commissioner, rightly said, he said, we're partners. He said that in a press conference that he insisted we hold at my office. So he said that, and he also said to the public, if you are afraid of talking to the police department, if you have, and there's plenty of people who are, if you don't trust them, if you don't, for some reason or other want to speak to them, you can call John Ray. So didn't it occur to the police since that took place, that press conference now, almost 2 years ago, didn't it occur to the police department that maybe John Ray has some more information? They haven't called me once for information, not once.
In your mind, do you feel it's plausible Rex Heuermann is involved in a group of people, and that's what the reason why they've been kind of shitty with the investigation and making missteps and covered stuff up is because they don't want it coming out that they've partied with him, that he knows cops? Is that a part that your mind entertains, is that he's in a group of people that's involved in this?
I wouldn't necessarily conclude that he was in a group of people, including police and that sort of thing. That's speculation. It's reasonable speculation, but it's speculation. I have eyewitnesses who have told me, of the three of them now, who have told me, maybe more, three of them that I remember, that told me that Rex Heuermann, in one case, a very credible witness who Rodney interviewed himself for over almost 2 hours with me in New York City, that she spent the night picking up, she was a taxi driver who picked up Shannon Gilbert running away from Rex Heuermann in the motel, the Sayville Motor Lodge or Motor Inn. And there's also others who said that Rex Heuermann was at parties in Oak Beach. Now, I don't know if they're true. I mean, there's a lot of circumstantial evidence that connects him to Oak Beach. I mean, the dumping of the bodies takes place right next to Oak Beach.
Yeah.
Gilgo's the next beach over, basically, not far. And Rex Heuermann was a duck hunter, and there are many duck hunters in Oak Beach. They belong to clubs. There's a hunting club he belonged to. There's the hunting club in Oak Beach. Did he belong to them? I don't know yet. But there are other people who say they saw Rex Heuermann in Oak Beach, who've come forward to me. So, are they trustworthy witnesses? No, not because they're lying, but because they haven't been confirmed.
Yeah,
haven't been corroborated. So they may be telling the truth, but I don't really know that. But somebody ought to be looking at that.
And I would argue law enforcement's not going to look into those things. I mean, so at the end of the day, how are you going to find out if there's any truth? Because I don't put trust in law enforcement to go down that rabbit hole, especially if a hunter has cops that hunt on the same grounds and that they could have bumped elbows with each other. Like I don't know how motivated they would be to go down that rabbit hole. And also,
well, they did a good job, using when Rodney came in. They did a good job in using the FBI's services and getting the DNA that led to Heuermann. We all know by now, it's a worn story that the police department could have solved this problem of Rex Heuermann being the suspect for years, up until they finally did catch him, because they had all that information at their fingertips for years. They knew that the description of the man. They knew he would have lived in a place in or about Massapequa Park, based on the pings on the towers. I knew that. My office knew that it had to be somebody in that area. We knew it for years. But they're the ones that had the statement of the guy who saw Rex and described him and saw his Avalanche, an unusual vehicle. They could have easily gone at any point in the years that they were investigating and knocked on doors of Avalanche owners in the area.
Yeah.
They didn't do that. All right. So the question is, what? These are homicide. These are people who are not just homicide, but they're homicide detectives in one of the most advanced police departments in the country, with the highest paid, certainly, or one of the highest paid in the country. You don't think that they would have thought to do that?
Right.
When they knew that evidence was there. And parenthetically, Rex was no genius. He was reckless. He let everybody see who he was. When he went to Costello's boyfriend's house, and twice he went there, and he was driving his Avalanche.
Right.
Does that sound like a guy who's very clever and careful? He dumps these bodies where they can be found very easily.
Yeah.
I mean, he was lucky. Miraculously, nobody discovered these bodies beforehand.
Well, I mean, there's so much, and we're not going to solve this case right now, right? So I do want to hit.
So DA, we were looking for a good spot to pause because John is backstage. So I'm going to go ahead and let people in the Hive know that Devil's Advocates will have the full interview posted. There's about 20 minutes left ish. And
yeah, I was going to ask, because I mean, John, this is a late night for John on the East Coast, and so I don't want to necessarily turn on John's camera if he's not ready to go live right now. But I wanted to give him the option. He's ready to go.
Yeah.
Okay.
I can see.
All right.
And all right, Hive, without further ado, here is John Ray. Oh, there he is. What's going on, John? Thanks for being here tonight.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Great interview with Devil's Advocates. And you got quite a few questions that are going to be lined up for you. And I'm sure that I'm sure they're stoked to hear what you have for as far as the answers go. So I will kind of let you kick this off.
Yeah, first of all, John, I'm really sorry for I really messed that up with you and your timing. So I apologize. I got back from CrimeCon and it's been a mess and I wasn't as prepared getting you ready on time. So I apologize for that. But I'm so glad that you made it tonight. And the questions have been great. People are super excited. We've got some really deep stuff in there. But I figured I want to give you a time to just get in and out if you want, so you can go back to bed and we can finish this interview later.
Well, I wasn't in bed and I had just come from a hearing, actually, believe it or not, in New York City. So I'm still charged up. So you can ask me anything you want, and I won't fall asleep, I promise.
Fantastic. Well, I just want to make sure it's up to you. We could finish the last 20 minutes and then take all questions as answers at the end, or we can go ahead and do questions and answers now, and we can finish without you. Which would you prefer?
Your show. You tell me.
Well, if you're still a little jacked, let's finish the thing so they have the full thing. And then we'll bring you up for the finish, if that's okay with you.
Whatever you say.
Perfect. Thank you so much, John.
Okay.
And back to the interview. Let me
couple things before we close, because I don't want to take too much of your time. Let's talk for a moment about
got the
Christopher
audio, DA?
Loeb, the reason why Burke goes to prison for a while for, roughing up a person who broke into his car and got stuff. Later on, it sounds like Chris Loeb said something to the effect, and maybe he's a con man or whatever, that there was a snuff tape in that car. Is that complete bunk? Is that just a con man talking to get more 15 minutes of fame? Because there was allegations in some documentary I saw that some of the cops had seen snuff films and they laughed about it. It wasn't a big deal. There was this attitude of they're just prostitutes. Who cares? Is there anything to that, or you think that was just kind of a wrong rabbit hole and the guy was just trying to get some notoriety talking about that?
It's quite a mixed bag of motives that are involved in that story. When he first told the story of the bag, the duffel bag, he only indicated that there were films in there. I don't even know if he even indicated there were films. He then later on indicated that there was porn films. He then later on indicated that they were worse than porn films. And that then eventually he came out and said they were child porn films. I've met with Christopher Loeb many, many times. He's been to my office many times. He's asked me to represent him. He's asked me to help him. I have helped the guy over the course of years with his personal life and so on. And he's an unholy mess. So his word is just not trustworthy. So there needs to be correct. There are cops who say that he made up that whole story. There are cops who say, no, he didn't. I don't know the truth in that story. No, it's come to the point where it's not quite likely to matter anymore, what the truth is about each element of that story. But I mean, because Burke has proved himself to be a pervert. He gets caught up on Bald Hill in Farmingdale just a year ago,
Right.
soliciting, giving oral sex to a man who turned out to be an undercover officer in a place, by the way, which is notorious for that sort of thing, up in the Vietnam Park on Bald Hill. I've had several clients that got busted up there. So certainly Burke would have known he was taking a high risk when he did that. So something's really wrong with the guy. Something. I mean, I had an investigator I spoke to who was my investigator, but by coincidence investigated Burke back in the day when she chased him for several miles while he was dressed up as a woman. And Loretta Rickenbacker told me that he was a cross-dresser and that, she didn't think he was capable of doing the killing, but that's another story. But you have all those things. But one other thing, if you don't mind me just interjecting something.
Yeah.
This is the same police department that investigates and gives the DA the work the information that he's working with. And the DA says on the first bail application on Uhrman in writing that Uhrman is acting alone and that he is sure that the wife and children were not involved in any of this because of two things. One, she was in Washington, D.C. or Atlantic City, rather, sorry. She was at Atlantic City at a hotel when Maureen Brainerd Barnes disappeared. And so she was not in the area, and she was in Iceland in another instance when he did a killing, and so on. So she couldn't have been there when this happened. So therefore they concluded that wife and children didn't know about any of this. And he was doing all this cleverly on his own in a 1,343 square foot house where he was murdering these girls downstairs, some of them anyway. And they expect us to believe that. And they said, well, look, Tierney says in his application, I have this proof that this hotel bill that shows that she checked in on, the girl disappears July 9th. She checks in on July 6th. So she wasn't there. She was down in Atlantic City. But I called the hotel manager and spoke to her. She pulled up the computer and still had the information of the check-in log there. And it turned out that, and I had 3 eyewitnesses to this as I spoke to the woman, and I had to review this several times with me, that the wife and children did not check in until July 14th, I believe it was.
Oh, wow.
And so they weren't telling the truth. Tierney hung his hat on the information given to him by the Suffolk County Police Department that bill was accurate, was an accurate bill when the hotel manager herself said, I've never heard of a bill that has a word arrival typed in on it before. And his other source of knowledge was Orsa Ellerup herself, the wife. He believed her. Those were his two sources of knowledge. Now you look at the behavior of that family subsequent to all of this, and you tell me that they're not involved. It's absurd to make that conclusion. And when Peacock did their story, that's not a documentary, by the way. Those people were highly paid to do what they did and perform as they did. That is inherently not a documentary.
Yeah,
right?
didn't also get like $1 million allegedly for an appearance?
1.2 allegedly
right.
for that. And the lawyers got money as well. And the daughter got money, according to the story put out by Peacock. So take it for what it's worth, but look at that film again and look at the things that are in that family's wrecked up house that they still have on the wall. They've got this girl, Orsa Ellerup, daughter has on the wall, and also, well, a huge wall hanging of the devil, of Baphomet.
Baphomet, yeah.
The devil.
Yeah.
They have demonic statues around the house in the picture, and the daughter's looking at all these sick videos and rather pictures that I was able to find in her internet, even though she and her mother whitewashed their internet as much as they could. And they're looking at pictures that are identical to what occurred to these girls who were actually killed. And everybody says they're fine. Take a look at that there's nothing else going on. Of course, there's more going on. The going on needs to be investigated. That's the problem. It's not about whether I conclude that they're involved in some satanic cult or not. That's irrelevant.
Right.
They may not be. They may be. Right. But they certainly reasonably may be. And if they are, they may be connected. That we've seen other cults that are connected to many other serial killers in the United States. Start with Charles Manson. And don't you think, therefore, it should be investigated? That's I keep saying from day one when I got into this case for Mary Gilbert, there needs to be a clean, clear, professional investigation. That has never occurred.
Right.
To this day.
And I think, I remember watching, I broke down on one of my videos, your, presentation of Victoria's artwork and some of the questions you were asking, like what kind of mind puts this kind of stuff out there and comments the way that she does on it, so I broke that down. And I know the media kind of like moved away from you a little bit like that. Like, what the hell's John Ray doing? This is like, we need to get away from this guy. But why are everybody so afraid to ask questions? Because again, you're not saying they are involved. You're more asking, what does this tell you? What, like you're asking the question. Why shouldn't we ask the questions and just investigate it?
Right.
It's just a question.
Why are we ignoring these things? Why are they being ignored when they're there? What is this? These people aren't who they say they are. Look at the callous mistreatment of this whole situation by the family now after they've been paid. Yeah. I won't go into it all. It's another whole story, but why do you think they're so callous? Could it be because they're in it, that they have an involvement in it? There's more evidence that they're involved than that Rex Heuermann's involved, in the sense that their hairs are found on the bodies.
Yes.
Right. And
that's where I was going to go. Is like
on the skulls of two of those bodies. How unusual is that?
Right.
I mean,
I'm with you. And I thought the same thing when the DNA of the mother and the daughter is found at the crime scene. And the answer is, well, it's just transferred DNA. It came from the house, without asking, is there a possible other question? I think, to play devil's advocates, right? It was like, well, Victoria had to have been one when some of those bodies were killed. So she wasn't killing at one. Right. So then
she might not be killing at all. Nobody's saying she's killing anybody, but she's involved in some way in those bodies.
Right.
Look at some of these things, that the pictures that she was they were looking at, and look at what Rex Heuermann said to Melissa Barthelomy's sister when he called her on the tape, and I was involved somewhat in that issue. What does he say? I'm sitting here watching your daughter rot.
Right.
Well, that was literally true, perhaps. And if it was, are they involved in some kind of bizarre behavioral thing where they go and visit the dead bodies, where they move the dead bodies, and so on. Are these not questions that need to be solved and asked, not just brushed off and say, whoop, nope, 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 Rex acted alone? There's a lot of evidence that he did not act alone. Take
Right.
John, what's his name? The killer of the other, Bitroff.
Yeah, Bitroff. Yeah. Mhm.
Right? So this is the same police department that publicly said he is likely the killer of the girl that was found the most recently. Name goes again. Sorry.
Yeah,
He's
I'm trying. Yeah.
Castilla. He is likely the killer of Castilla. We just have to find enough evidence to get him. They hovered around and made it clear that that was their position for years, because of the wood chips that are found around her, and the position of her body and the way her legs were staged in the killing. Okay, and they said if Bitroff did the same with the others, it's got to be Bitroff, because the girl is found in the same area and so on. Until they do the DNA test on the one hair they find, and it turns out to be Uhrman's first wife's hair.
Yeah.
Okay, so now they indict Uhrman. So all the while, the same police department is saying this guy did it, and they say, "Oh, okay, I'm just kidding. It was this. It's Bitroff who did it. Uhrman who did it all along." And does it occur to them that Bitroff and Uhrman might have had a relationship? Did they ever check that to see?
Right.
The wood chip thing, for example, I interviewed the man who rented the wood chipping machine to Uhrman to be used in his front yard, because Uhrman was a wood craftsman that made in his garage. He had where he would work on making cabinets and things like that. And this guy sold him or rented to him a wood chipper. And Rex got enraged because it didn't work and made the guy come back. And I interviewed this guy. I talked to him at length. Right. So both he and Bitroff were involved in with wood chips and using them perhaps around the bodies. Could it be that they actually interacted with each other? Are there other ways that one might look at that? They're both hunters. They're both possibly belonging to hunting clubs out in the same area, where Uhrman dumped Jessica Taylor and Valerie Mack. There are other. I'm the layman on this. I haven't gone into this in depth, but certainly that's a question. Instead of oops, nope, everybody's acting alone. Were they acting alone?
Well, and it's funny because you're bringing me to where I was going to close for the day, and I've been keeping it kind of long. And I think you and I, when we talked about this early on, you said, Lee, we could talk about this for 8 hours and we're not going to be scratching the surface of the thing. And I can see that now, like we're just touching on some surface things, and all of these things could go much deeper. And so maybe if you're willing sometime, I can get you back to talk some more, but I want to kind of wrap up on something you just touched on, which is the internet community, the YouTubers, the web sleuths, the people that are going out there and doing that kind of investigative work. Are they able, you think, to help break those questions that law enforcement's not going to ask? Was there a connection between Uhrman and a hunting club, and are there cops involved and whatever? Because those are questions I don't think law enforcement's going to ask ever, and it's not questions the prosecutor is going to ask now that they've got their guy and they're going after Uhrman. So, is there a benefit? Do you feel, or how do you feel about? In general, like is the YouTube community kind of mostly just getting in the way and harassing families and victims, and they should just mind their own business and let the officials do their job, or the officials dropping the ball and there's a benefit for the armchair investigator?
There's a benefit for the armchair investigator. Many of these people have very sophisticated minds. They spend endless hours studying the evidence. They're not necessarily well trained in what they do, and then again, some of them are. They're sources of information, and they're sources of logical deduction. They should not be ignored, and sometimes they're even sources of actual evidence. They should not be ignored. The problem that we have is because it's the public. Well, it has the public with all of the public's characteristics. When you talk about armchair investigators, there are those who misuse the platforms and the research that they're doing to they disparage witnesses, they hurt people. There's a small group of them, and very small actually, but still, who attack me relentlessly, ruthlessly, viciously, make all kinds of accusations against me, my family, and everybody else they can think of, and you're going to have those kind of nut jobs out there. You have others who are faking it, pretending that they're involved deeply with the families and they're fakers. They're frauds. You're going to have frauds. You're going to have these kind of people. And you're right. Armchair they're not walking the beat. They're not taking the testimony like I have. They haven't gone into the marsh like I have. They haven't done. I've been all over several states in this case. I've done a lot of work on it. I've been up to Buffalo. I've sent my investigators up there and so on because of the connections of the people up there with the case here. They don't do that, but still, when you give somebody the puzzle and they can put it together, maybe that's valuable. So I'm not against the internet at all. I really think it's worth it, even with all of its, problems like that, all of its improprieties.
So in your mind, if somebody's watching our replay or when this airs and somebody's watching it and you say a name or something, they're like, oh my God, that reminds me, I had an interaction with him. Do you encourage people to reach out to you with those kind of tips? Do you feel it's a waste of your time? What kind of thing would you want the public to reach out with you if they've got some kind of information that you just reminded them of or whatever? How's that work?
Well, it's always been since I started my career. I think I told you with high profile cases, it's always been true that the real value of having press conferences and being on the internet and having podcasts and like this show, the real value is that it generates evidence. It generates witnesses who come forward and actually can help move forward the case. And I've had that happen in case after case after case. So, the accusation, well, you like you like the limelight, you like the bright lights of Hollywood and all that. Sure. I haven't made a penny on this case, by the way. I haven't written anything, no movies or anything of that sort. But one thing I did notice is I've generated an enormous amount of evidence in the case, and it will still continue to do that. When I had that famous Kaplan case years ago with the surrogate father, we had people come from Florida to Maine who came forward as witnesses that helped us in that case. And so the same thing accrues here. And many of these people are people who they just don't like to talk to the police for a lot of good reasons. And who does? If we did, we'd all live in a police state. We'd be happily living in a police state. But we're not. We don't. And it's like people say, well, all these people are the police persecute. There's so many innocent people out there. That's not really true. Most people charged are guilty, not necessarily what they're charged with. They're guilty of something, and otherwise this would be a police state, and it's not. We're in a free country.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, what's going to happen is there's a difference between what's going to be proven in a court of law and what the official answer is going to be, and what, as far as at the end of the day, whether Rex did it or not, and what the public believes happened. Because I think, again, internet sleuths are going to ask questions that the law enforcement never asked. They're going to go down holes and rabbit holes that the police department never did. And there's going to be the difference between the official narrative and the story that we put the bow on it at the end of the day, and the one that everybody thinks really happened, or various people will always have different theories, I think, at the end of the day. And I think this case is going to be enormous next year when it starts, really kicking off. I wanted to ask you one last thing before we finish for today. I heard there's a Fry hearing coming up. What's that?
I rambled
no, there's a Fry hearing, I think, coming up in Heuermann's case. Are you going to be at that Fry hearing, and do you have any expectations of what happens on that?
I will not be at the Fry hearing. It's not something I'm involved in, and so I leave that to others. The expectations are interesting. On the one hand, you have Tim Macy, who's he was a well-respected district attorney for many years, and then assistant district attorney.
Hey, Bertie, are you still there?
Yep, I'm here.
Yeah, I was just going to say everything at that point is really kind of fluff at that end. We had talking about the Fry hearing, which he wasn't going to be at, and he wasn't as important. I would say let's get him up here. Really, the ending was just kind of saying goodbye.
All right, here he is. John, thank you for being patient. Appreciate that.
Sure.
Thank you. Well, I think for the most part, I should shut the hell up. I've done enough talking, and since John's here, it's his show. I'd love for you to pin some questions for him. You can read the questions that we pin on the screen, or do you want us to read them to you, John, or how do you want to handle?
I need my glasses, and
Fair
they
enough.
moved so quickly when you were showing. I couldn't
yeah.
really keep up with them all.
Yeah,
I'll
have him. Yeah,
I can read them for you, John. And I was just doing that to show you kind of how excited everybody was. But it's nice to meet you. I don't know how much DA has told you about the Hive and what we do here, but we're a contrarian thinking live stream where the chat is actually a part of the stream. And I know Devil's Advocates runs his channel in a very similar way. So we thought it was a great fit to do this together this evening. So I'm honored to have you in here. And yeah, so I do have a question.
Sure.
Just to kind of kick this off for you myself. Do you feel like this case is ever going to be truly solved? You had talked about truth isn't always justice. The truth is the truth in your interview with DA. Can you go more into the weeds of what you meant by or I believe maybe you said justice isn't always the truth. Can you talk about that a little bit? Because I thought that was pretty profound.
Well, thank you. I'm glad you thought so. But I think what I'm saying is that justice is a real thing, and justice, it personified, is a very cold goddess and granite goddess. And if we all wanted justice, we might be very, very sad if we ever got it, for the sins we've all done in our lives. I think our concentration really should be on mercy. And that's just a take I have on it. But as far as my role and the role of others who are investigating this case should be, it's to seek the truth, not to seek justice. It's not my role, not my job to seek justice. And I don't know that you can get justice for people who are dead in any event. But it is to find the truth, and that speaks for itself. I think I mentioned that. I mean, in the greatest trial in history, actually two trials, the greatest two trials in history, the trial of Jesus Christ. The question was asked of Christ by the procurator, Pontius Pilate. What is truth?
Well
one
said.
of the most profound questions asked of one of the most profound man in human history. And I, in a sense, say we should ask that question in every case. What is really the truth? That's what we seek. Does that answer your question?
That does. That absolutely does. And I think you worked it into the interview with DA wonderfully, how you did state it. And I do have a question here from the Hive, and I'll put it up on screen and I'll also read it for you. I was hoping that it wasn't going to cover your face, so I apologize. I will take it down after that. But
it's all right. No problem. Don't worry.
One had asked, you've mentioned witnesses who placed Shannon and Rex near the vehicle matching his description. Can these accounts be elaborated on?
Yeah, there's a witness who came forward and gave me an affidavit, and she was interviewed at length by myself and the commissioner of the police, Rodney Harrison, for nearly 2 hours in a place in New York City. And she seemed very credible. She was able to place Shannon Gilbert in the Sayville Motor Inn, and that Rex Uhrman came out of that same room after Shannon had called in desperation, trying to get out, and managed to get out. And she interviewed Shannon, and what Shannon told her matched what was true about Shannon's family. So, the trouble you have with her testimony and many others is not that it's not true, as I've said, but rather that it's not corroborated. There's no way to corroborate these things very often. Or in her case, there were certain people you could have corroborated the testimony with if you sought them out and found them, but I don't know that the police ever did that.
Is there anyone on Heuermann's prosecution team that would, or I'm sorry, during the trial, okay, who do you think the prosecution would not want cross-examined? If you had to guess.
Not want cross-examined? I'd imagine just about every person who takes that stand
wouldn't want to be.
Brings with him or her the risk of a finding of lack of credibility, of inconsistency. And so there's no great, shibboleth that exists that is going to come in and blow the case wide open against Rex Heuermann. The case is very strong against Rex Heuermann. But so I don't see that there's any one person that could do that. But everybody who takes the stand takes the risk of blowing it. And that's already occurred in the DNA testimony of the experts. The Michael Brown, the lawyer for Heuermann, did a fabulous job in pulling apart the so-called experts on the new DNA method of testing hairs that have no roots. And the judge chose to go the other direction, which is good for everybody because Rex Heuermann is probably guilty, overwhelmingly so. But nonetheless, those two characters who worked for that outfit in California that's creating the testing, they didn't do so well when they got up there. They took the risk that they would blow the case. And in fact, what they do indeed is they have created an issue, because even though Judge Macy decided that the DNA is admissible as a science, or the DNA testing is admissible as a scientific method. It is the first time that's been found in a courthouse in the United States that science is valid. And yet, because of that controversy and because of the poor testimony of the witnesses in favor of that DNA, they have created an appealable issue, a very strong appealable issue. So in direct proportion as that DNA is relied upon, they create the possibility that an appellate court will throw out Macy's decision. And Rex, nobody's thought about that apparently, but because they took the stand and took the risk I'm telling you about now.
Because you'd said, John, that the case has plenty of circumstantial evidence, and they've got enough evidence without the DNA. So what you're saying is, in a way, they could have set themselves up to shoot themselves in the foot, because they could have done this case without the DNA.
They could have, but I think they needed to try to get it in. But perhaps the people who testified ought to have been much better prepared for the weaknesses that they themselves exposed in their approach. And so there's an appealable issue sitting there waiting. And think about it. Some of the women are connected to Heuermann only through the DNA testing. So if the DNA testing turns out to be not valid on an appeal, those murders go away.
Wow. That's interesting.
So I mean, it's just a thought.
Yeah.
When I try cases, civilly as well as criminally, you have to always look ahead and think about what you're creating for an appealable issue, or what the other side is doing.
So, I mean, I don't want to focus on this too long, but because I think you said this is the first time this particular scientific method this is like the precedent, right? This is a bit setting the precedent that scientific method is now okay to use in future trials.
Yes,
but
it is.
Yeah, very interesting.
Exactly right.
But they didn't do a great job at presenting it.
Correct. So that's why it's appealable.
Yeah.
And I use that as the prime example of what you asked me about, about witnesses. So they all take that risk. I can't tell you how many cases I've had where, you expect the witness to say one thing and the witness says exactly the opposite when they're on the stand. Opposite of what they might have told you repeatedly. And it happens over and over.
Do you have an example?
Because we're human.
Yeah, because we're human. And I was just going to ask you, do you have an example in your mind throughout your, I believe you had said 43-year career?
Yeah.
Do you have an example that pops into your head where you're like, oh my God, I did not expect them to say that, whether it's about this case or anything else?
Just about every case I've ever had, that seems to happen sometime in some ways. And it depends on, not necessarily, against me, sometimes in my favor. But sure, I've had plenty of those.
I can imagine.
You have no idea, actually. you know, but people do that all the time, and if a lawyer tries to coach them, and what's the difference between getting them ready and coaching them? There's a gray area, isn't there? And when
Yeah.
the lawyer tries to coach them, it just boomerangs inevitably.
This,
Why? Because you
you're
shouldn't
making
do
me
it.
you're making me digress, because when they say something that surprises you, is it when you're putting them on the stand, or when they're under cross? Like, is it, have you
Both.
had this somebody? Yeah, that sucks. If you
Both.
you coach
I
them
mean,
and you put them on and they still surprise you.
yeah, I don't coach them. I prepare them, but
Right.
I won't tell them to lie, and I won't tell them to
Sure.
commit. That's stupid. That just doesn't make any sense, and it's also wrong. It's morally wrong.
Right.
So you don't do that. But
Right.
if they can sit there and look you in the eye and say, this is what happened, they can understand and say exactly the opposite. I just had
Right.
it happen the other day in another case, in my favor, actually, but it happened. So people are people. That's what they take, that risk when somebody's going to put them up there. There's all that pressure on them. They've sworn to tell the truth. There's people watching them. They know they're being judged, and an expert, meaning another lawyer, is asking them questions that put them on the spot. What do you expect to happen?
Yeah.
I want to
Surprise
make sure we get a couple of questions that are very specific to the case, because we're kind of talking about some non-specifics to this case.
Sure.
And I don't know if Bertie can pin this or not, but like one of the questions was, you've alleged a broader potential conspiracy involving police and other individuals. Has Rex Heuermann's arrest changed your view on this at all?
No, my view is that not quite as you've expressed it, if you don't mind me saying so.
Mhm.
My view is different. My view is that you need to rely on evidence, and evidence is what is it, somewhere in one of Sherlock Holmes stories? It's evidence, evidence, always evidence. That's the key. So my idea is, let's rely on the evidence. Now, the evidence can cause you to draw inferences. Those inferences can run anywhere from being very reasonable to being very speculative, but they're not evidence. And so you need the evidence until the inference becomes overwhelming beyond a reasonable doubt before you can make it into a series, a pattern of facts that lead you to the proper truth, to the conclusion. And so people come up with all kinds of inferences, which is to say, all kinds of theories about what happened and what's likely. I just saw an interesting thing on Reddit, and where somebody said there was a surgical blanket allegedly found below the body of Jessica Taylor, and so there was a lot of speculation on the internet about where it came from. And there are a lot of good reasons to believe it came from this place or that place. That's important from this witness or that. That's important in the entire case. But we don't know where it came from. It's speculation. So what does one person who holds himself out as very knowledgeable all the time on the internet say? Oh, it probably came from a shop. He probably bought it in a shop. You could do that in a store. How would you know that? Why would you say that as truth? That's not
Right.
truth. That's a guess, right?
Yeah.
And the police are guilty of guessing as well in this case, hugely, several times, which their guessing has hurt them, and it's going to hurt them in the Heuermann trial. So we shouldn't be doing that. We should be just trying to gather the evidence and patch together only very reasonable, overwhelmingly likely inferences before we make conclusions. So that's the one way I'd want to have a take on this. That brings me back to your question, which is, I think you had said that my theory was that there's several people involved. That's not my theory. It's one theory, but what I say is that theory, along with others, needs to be followed up. It needs to be investigated.
Yep.
And the evidence in that regard needs to be investigated and not discarded summarily, as it has been almost serially by the police department in this entire case. That's what needs to be done, and it has never been done. So, that's my lesson for the day. If you I could say it that way. We need more investigation of these other theories that exist.
That is music to my ears. John, that is exactly what I love to do that in general. I know DA does as well. And it's like theories with receipts, and people who maybe only read the headlines, they might call you a conspiracy theorist, or as DA said, maybe you're just the armchair investigator. And I thought it was great that you had said, no, sometimes, having more eyes on it, you all are seeing stuff that leads to real evidence. So,
well, and like John was saying, like a lot of times if you ask a question, all of a sudden somebody rephrases it like, you think this, and like, I don't think that. I just asked the question. We should be asking questions. Yeah.
Right. There's evidence that there are other people involved in the Human case. How can anybody deny the evidence that the hairs of Åsa Ellerup are found on several of the bodies, and one hair on the buckle of the belt that was used to strangle one of the girls? That's evidence. That's real evidence. It's her hair. And what does that mean? Does that mean she's involved? Somebody needs to look harder at that question and not just write it off blithely, as the district attorney did do, I think at the urging of the police department, that these were hairs that fell off of they were family hairs gathered on Rex Heuermann, and they fell off of him while he was killing these girls. Same with the daughter's hair, the same with the first wife's hair. There needs to be more investigating of why those hairs were there. Think about it. If we're going to hold Rex Heuermann rationally responsible for the deaths of some of these women only because we can connect the DNA to him, doesn't it follow logically that the hair is more directly connected to the people whose hair it was than it is to him? And there's not a scintilla of evidence that it fell off of his body. That's an inference without evidence. So what do we have? We have an equal proof that they're guilty, the people whose hair it was, as he's guilty, if we're going to rely upon that evidence alone.
Yeah.
Right. And I don't want to beat this to death, but that's exactly what I say about law enforcement and stuff like that getting narrow focused, because once they decide, they start to not look at anything that doesn't support what they're going for in that conviction. So they stop asking the questions. There's a pragmatic
reason for that. There's a very pragmatic reason for that. That's historical. You can see it in case after case across the history of criminal of serial killers and crime in America. And that is that when the police finally get, they narrow down a difficult case, a complex case, and they narrow it down like they did here to certain facts that prove that this person is the killer. Anything else that comes in that's collateral, that could muddy the water, that could point the finger elsewhere, could be used by the defense to do that, should not be looked at because it gets in the way of proving that this guy did it. And so they willfully, intentionally ignore those kinds of circumstances. They don't spread their wings and investigate everything. They focus on what they need to prove their case and get the guy convicted.
Which is why, right. And this is, I mean, I agree. And you don't want to interject any doubt because you're trying to go for a conviction, and you don't want to add doubt and room for reasonable doubt. But this is why I say Bertie and I do what we do, which is we're allowed to ask those questions that the prosecutor is not going to ask, and the law enforcement is not going to ask because it will jeopardize their case. But we can ask, and we can theorize, and we can ask questions, and maybe, get to some answers, or at least, I find that that's interesting for us to be able to ask the questions that they can't ask really.
Right. Well, the nice part about the fact that, there's other people looking at this is that the other people, they may come with all kinds of biases and prejudices, and suppositions and the like. But collectively, when you put together all the things that they're coming forward with, it can result in a very substantial advancement of the case, the real case, the truth, the entire truth about this case. Remember, just to focus on one point to make my point more poignant. Remember that in the first bail application, the district attorney, who I count as a friend, and he has great integrity, but he puts in as a first bail application that Rex Heuermann acted alone, and he repeats it several times, and that the wife and children are definitely not involved in any way. And he does this on the first bail application by relying upon two pieces of evidence: the hotel bill for the Atlantic City Hotel, where the family stayed, so that they were theoretically not at the scene of the crime of Maureen Brainerd Barnes, because they were away in Atlantic City when, at the time, she disappeared. And the second part of that evidence that they produced was Asa Ellerup told him so. He relied upon Asa Ellerup's self-serving declaration to him.
Yeah.
That, you know, when you take that and you weigh it against what we know, and we now know, as I told you in the show, that the hotel said that these people did not check in when the bill said they did. Okay, the hotel records show otherwise, and you weigh that in you know, in the balance of things. They're relying upon very weak suppositions to come to this conclusion. And by the way, did anybody ever ask? I know some people have asked. I know it, but I mean, did the DA ever ask? Let's see. You know, this family was in Iceland when Rex Heuermann replaced the bathroom, and wrote to them and said so. And they were there when, you know, other murders were committed. Does anybody ask? Do we know the exact date when these girls were murdered? We only have Jessica Taylor within a few hours of her death, that her body is located, but the others, they could be months. In other words, could these girls have been kept? If you look at what Rex was looking at and what he was involved in, the kinds of porno that he was involved in, the sadomasochistic porno, these girls are captured and they're kept slaves and so on before they're tortured slowly to death. You know, did we don't know how long Asa Ellerup and the children were away before they came back. And when they came back, whether those girls were still alive, we don't know. And the DA doesn't know. If they did, they put it out there. This is when this girl died. This is when that girl died. But they don't know that. And here they are making these conclusions. You know, consider that, you know, some of these girls, the tortures that were done of these girls could have taken weeks before they actually died. You know, and we have, you know, where did some of these bodies end up? Did they end up in the place where they were dumped when they were killed, or where they moved? Has anybody looked at that? You know, how does that, you say, well, how could a 3-year-old girl's hair appear on it's the daughter, on two skulls of two of the women killed at different times that had to have fallen off the father? Could it, by equal reasoning, couldn't it have fallen off the mother? And the baby being held by the mother is much more likely than the baby being held by the father and having the hair on her. Or could it be that they were involved in moving the bodies several times over the course of time? After all, we have Rex Heuermann calling using the cell phone of Melissa Barthelemy after she was killed, or at least after she was taken, and she's calling the sister up in Lockport, you know, near Buffalo, and saying to the sister, you know, I'm watching your sister's body rot. I said, and I misstated that and said that your mother's body rot, but it was your sister's body rot. Well, if he's doing that, and it looks like he really was, and, you know, he's involved in that kind of sick stuff, isn't there a good chance that other people were involved in that as well with him? You know, look at the circumstances of this family. Everybody says, "Oh, look at Asa Ellerup. Wow, you know, how could she possibly be saying that this is her hero? This man is her hero of her life, when she knows that he's very likely done this? And how could she say that you know, he's, you know, he's her sweetheart and all these things she called him? Excuse me, she can say that if she's involved in it, couldn't she? Isn't that the most likely explanation? I don't say it's the actual explanation, but it is a good one and should be looked at more carefully. There are other people potentially involved in this case, likewise in the Shannon Gilbert case, that I have evidence of.
Such a
I don't know.
thought, you know.
Yeah, and I, what you were saying, and you know, was this the narrative of, well, the killings must have happened while the family was out of town. you're pointing out there's really no evidence of that. They're just it's a narrative, right? So they're like, well, how could it have happened without their understanding? It must have been every time they went out of town, that's when it happened. But now that you're saying it, I don't know that they've ever proven that any of the murders happened during that window.
Nobody can prove it, and although they could possibly disprove it, and that should be looked at. Taking this as a small instance, I'm hoping that the homicide people thought of this. They probably did, because they're not stupid people by any means. So Rex sends a note to wife while wife is in Iceland, saying, the bathroom, I made a mess in the bathroom, so I replaced the bathroom. And like this great announcement that he did that. Any cop dealing with people in crimes who are involved in serial crimes like drug dealing, haven't they noticed that people speak in code to one another? They speak in codes. I mean, I can't tell you how many drug dealers I've represented over the course of years who they had their own codes worked out. Some of them were very silly, but they were codes. And was that a code for her to come home, that he cleaned up the mess that he had made? It's time to come home and do whatever they're going to do with the body. Could it be that? Was that a code? Was that a signal to her to write to her? I mean, what do you make a mess in the bathroom, so you completely replace the bathroom? Does that sound right to you?
No.
Or is it a code that, yeah, I murdered somebody, there's slaughter all over the place, come on home? Did anybody think of that?
Yeah.
Well, when you say it like that, it seems almost as if the wife is aware that he's got a sick habit, and either she doesn't necessarily maybe want to be around, or if she was traveling, at that moment, and he gave her the green light to come back home. I mean, I don't think that that's a stretch. It's just, I think that there's so many people that is such a dark theory, because it's not relevant in their life. They don't know anybody that's ever had a habit like that it's hard for them to wrap their head around. Oh my God. Like, when you're hearing, people like yourself saying that does sound like a code. It really does.
I'm so glad John said it, because when I say shit like that, people kick me in the nuts. They're like, "Oh, the devil's over here, just making a stretch." I'm like, "Hey, even John makes some speculations from that." Well, it's not a speculation. Again, it's asking questions.
Yeah.
He's not saying that's what happened. It's like, why wouldn't we ask? Is that what's happening? It's just a question, and people are so afraid of the questions.
Yeah, these are. Look, they're theories. Those are theories that need to be investigated because the evidence drives you to do so. They need to be looked at. That's all. I mean, you put together the collective evidence here of the murders that take place potentially downstairs in this crazy room in a 1,343 square foot house. You're going to tell me that the wife, you guys, I assume, have wives or partners, and many other people watching this do. Did you ever meet a wife that doesn't go downstairs and want to look right away when the husband says, "Don't go downstairs and look"?
Yeah,
that's not going to fly at my house.
Where's that going to fly? And they've got a submarine-like door with a handle like a submarine.
Yeah,
a metal door, and nobody pays attention in a 1,343 square foot house. You hear everything that goes on in a house like that. You put that together. You've got this the hanging on the wall in their house when Peacock interviews them is Baphomet, the devil, a wall hanging of the devil, and behind that a wall hanging of witchcraft symbols. And you don't put that together and say, "Hey, something's up here, something's wrong." They have on their kitchen table, when the police come in a year after the second time they come into the house with a warrant, a year after the first time almost, and there's a book on the table that the Church of Satan uses as their Bible, that they made a Mondo movie out of that book, filled with pictures of women disemboweled and their legs cut off, and dead people with their heads chopped off and so on, laying on the kitchen table in that house when they came in the second time, when the daughter alone was home. And then you look at the daughter's pictures, the consistency of all these things, consistent with murder, consistent with death, consistent with the enjoyment and pleasure of sick pleasure of watching death. And you don't put those things together and say, "Wait a minute, there's something wrong here."
Right. I would think.
Wow.
Those things never seem to get into the narrative. And that was going to actually be a question that I personally had, is like, is there one question that you wish that call it the mainstream reporters would ask law enforcement when it comes to this case that they have not been asked, to just like straightforward yes or no? Or is there a question that either the media knows not to ask that you think if it was would really put LE on their heels?
No, I can't think of a single question, but I can think of, I'm not that creative. I don't have that dramatic flair, but I can think of this. When the police speak, when the district attorney speaks, once, please, once, for the first time, I haven't heard it yet in the years I've been in this case since 2011. Once, would you please, reporters, question them and do follow-up questions that put them on the spot and challenge their inconsistencies? They haven't done that once. They just, the media is just completely complacent and takes exactly what the police feed them and says, oh, that's the police, that's fine, okay. And when they ask a question, like there was a question asked at the last press conference with Ray Tierney by one of the reporters, is Shannon Gilbert involved in this case, in the Human case? And Tierney, he misdirected the answer. He didn't answer the question. Nobody followed up and said, wait a minute, you didn't answer the question. How about you answer the question? Nobody asked that. Nobody did that. And they don't do that again and again and again and again. They don't challenge authority because that's how they make their living. That's their food. They're fed by the authorities with information, and they take it and accept it.
And you said it before, the spoon-fed media who doesn't ask critical questions. And it drives me nuts because then so many people in America just parrot mainstream media, which is never going to ask the difficult questions. And this is what Bertie and I butt up against every single day on our channels, is people come into us and say, well, it's this way because the media told us. And I'm like, the media doesn't ask the right questions. But anyways, I'm off my soapbox.
No, it's a great point. I mean, I think the point, like hearing it from you, gives it validation. It's all validation, or it's not that we need validation, but it is nice to hear somebody that's actively involved in a case where you see it in person, right? We just have to kind of see it through the headlines and sift through, the black and the white. So, I mean, personally, I'm glad that you said it. I think that there should be reporters. I've always joked around and said I could never be an actual reporter, John, because if I asked a question and someone didn't answer it, I'd be like, well, we're not going anywhere until this question gets answered. Like
when they held to your point, they held a press conference, the Commissioner Rodney Harrison and Ray Tierney back in May of 2022, when they decided to finally release the tapes to the public, which I convinced them to do. I convinced Rodney to do in my office. He sat right here where I am now, and agreed to release the tapes to the public, the 911 tapes of Shannon's calls. They held a press conference at Suffolk County Community College for media only. And at that press conference, after they made a speech and put up misleading, outright false photographs of the marsh and such things as that, and said, well, the conclusion was, according to Detective Lieutenant Byrer, head of homicide, she died of an unfortunate, tragic accident. And they left it at that. Now, you start off with this, wait a minute, how do you know she died of that? And what accident are you referring to? And what's your evidence of that? Did you ever hear of homicide detectives drawing conclusions without evidence? Their whole lives are endued with evidence. That's what they're all about, is evidence. They have to have evidence in order to convict people, or those people walk free. So they're very attuned to evidence. They have not a scintilla of evidence that she died of an accident. They don't say what the accident is. They don't say how it happened, when it happened, because they don't know. So then how can they conclude that that's what happened? So shouldn't somebody in the media have asked them what I just pointed out and said, yes, how did you do that? What is your no. And in fact, they were allowed to walk off the stage and say, no more questions. And nobody's ever come to them and said, wait a minute, you walked off the stage last time and said no more questions. How about you answer our question? And then ask them real questions.
Yeah.
They didn't do that.
Yeah,
insane.
I could go on and on about that topic, and I
Right.
won't. So, Da, if you got a question from your side that somebody was wanted to ask.
Well, here's the thing. I mean, it's getting late, especially on the East Coast, and we've been at this for 2 hours and 14 minutes. And John told me when we first got together we could be talking about this for 8 hours and never scratch the surface. There's a million great questions in there, each one of which could take 20 minutes to discuss. So I'm kind of inclined to let John go and move on with his night, unless, John, you want to say any closing thoughts to our audiences and stuff tonight.
Or I have one fun question.
Yeah,
That's
sure.
kind of fun. Quote. All right. If the New York Times gave you tomorrow's front page to print your quote real Long Island serial killer story, like what would your headline be that you would run? You have full green light. What are you putting on it?
In the New York Times?
Yeah, I'm putting it on the spot, but what's your on the spot answer?
Why do you ask me these creative?
I don't know, John. You seem like a fun guy. I don't know.
He just told you earlier he's not an on the fly kind of guy to throw that stuff out there.
It'd be a good one to end on, right?
I don't have that. It's not in me. I'm sorry.
I didn't know if you had one.
That wasn't fair. That wasn't fair, Bertie, to do that to you.
I know. But either way, John, I just want to say also thank you so much for your time and for being patient. Sure. And it was an honor to have a chance to speak with you. And I'll give you the floor if you have any closing thoughts for anybody in the audience.
Just the closing thought is that this case is not over. These cases are not over. There's plenty of evidence that already points to Rex Heuermann having committed murder in other states. I have several witnesses who've come to me who actually survived him and what he did, and they are from other states as well, states where murders have occurred that are not explained. So that needs to be explored deeply, including in Alaska and Anchorage, and in other states as well. There's much more to Rex Heuermann and his family than has been investigated. There's much more to the Shannon Gilbert story, far more than has been revealed by the district attorney. And we cannot allow them to rest contented in possession of the truth when, like what was it? Tolkien's The Dragon Fanfare.
We were just talking about that.
Yeah. They cannot be allowed to do that. And the only way to make sure that they're not allowed to do that is for the public to do what the public does so well, which is to put pressure, notwithstanding the media, upon the authorities to do their job. And, the trouble we have is that many of the public themselves are, going along with the authorities because that's what they do. You see them on Reddit, that places like that, where there's an awful lot of people who are just convinced that whatever the DA says is okay, whatever the authorities say is okay. It's not. It needs to be deeply investigated. There's also here the culture of corruption that has existed throughout more than an era within the Suffolk County Police Department and within other institutions in our society here on Long Island and throughout the country, where I've spent some time, for example, in Jersey City, New Jersey, up in Buffalo and Lockport, where there's connections of this corrupt culture that needs to be investigated. It needs to be broken open, and you will find when that crust is broken through and you get into the muck, how really evil has prevailed, and that this needs to be fought, and it needs to be fought by the search for the truth.
That's a great way to say it, and it's a shameless plug. If the mainstream media won't let you talk about it, John, you're always welcome to come on Bertie and I's show and talk about anything you get.
And I got your headline. It's "These cases aren't over," and then just have all their pictures right on it. Look at that teamwork right there, man.
Awesome.
Well, thank you so much, John. I really appreciate the time. And with that, Hive, I'm going to be back on the stream tomorrow evening at 7 p.m. Central. Devil's Advocates will have the full interview that we had premiered here in the Hive before John was kind enough to come up and answer some questions. And with that, I hope everybody has a fantastic rest of their night. Thank you again, John. Thank you, DA. Cheers.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay.
You.
Birds flying high, you know how I feel. You know how I feel. Breeze drifting on by. You know how I feel. It's a new dawn. It's a new day. It's a new life.